Really good topic still in line here. And I know that Nick Carroll is queued up to get into his session, which he's going to talking about insourced versus outsourced. So with that, let's bring Nick in. Hey, Nick.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, good, good. Glad you could join us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is really exciting.
Good, good. We'll turn it over to you, Nick.
Perfect. I'm really glad I'm following up after Jeremiah because what I'm talking about plays in really well, and these topics kind of tie together very closely. So this is a perfect alignment here. So I'm Nicholas Carroll. I'm a manager of cyber incident response it was Raytheon. We've been divested as of April 1st, which is a great April Fool's joke. Now we're a standalone company known as Nightwing. We support Fortune 500 clients and government doing all kinds of different, cybersecurity and intelligence service and things. I personally am coming up on about 20 years in the field, which is terrifying for me to think about. I've been everything from help desk to CISO in my time in cybersecurity. And one of the things that I like to kind of highlight for those of you who are on the stream that are maybe interested in cybersecurity or new to cybersecurity, I am a former college dropout, and my first real job was pushing shopping carts, right? Your journey into cybersecurity is your own journey. You don't have to necessarily follow what everybody says. You just have to make sure that you're applying yourselves. And really, this is a great field because what you put into it, you will get back in, droves, right? Your effort, the things that you do will be paid back to you in this field. And I think that is one of the great things that attracts people into this field. And hopefully, on your own journey, you'll kind of find your way through and get things done there. You can feel free to connect with me. I'm on LinkedIn. I apologize if you're sending me LinkedIn connection requests right now. I am not looking or paying attention. I want to say a quick thank you to SCYTHE. UniCon is a really awesome virtual conference. I'm super excited to actually be able to present at one. I've attended a few times in the past, and there's always been excellent speakers and everything. So I appreciate you guys putting this together and getting everybody here. One of the big things in cybersecurity that I really try to drive is knowledge, because it's such an incredibly important item for everyone to have. And there are a lot of different organizations in cybersecurity that will sell you that knowledge. And sometimes it's very expensive to buy. So these kinds of events where people can join freely and share their ideas and connect, I think are critically important to helping cybersecurity grow as a field. So we're talking about insourced versus outsourced cybersecurity services. One of the things I want to talk about real quick is kind of the numbers on this, right? Why do we do things, or how and who is doing what? What does the actual industry say? And conveniently, SANS does a SOC survey every year where they put out a questionnaire to about 500 different organizations to look at their security operations centers to get an idea of how they're doing, what new technologies they're bringing in, how are they growing, and how is the field moving overall. And one of the things that SANS always asks about in their survey is, are you outsourcing these items, or are you using an in-sourced team, an in-house team to perform this work? Or some sort of hybrid model, right? Are you using both to accomplish this in a hybrid solution? And when you look at the information, it's really interesting to see that a lot of the respondents tend to say that there is some sort of in-sourced component, right? Or they're primarily looking at an in-sourced component on things. But there's still a heavy reliance on outsourced solutions or some sort of hybrid model between the two. So when we look at the numbers in particular, most likely to be insourced, we see a lot of stuff related to administration, engineering, and kind of governance and compliance, right? Planning your organization, how you need to work, your business models and things. These are the types of workflows that a lot of organizations are keeping in-house, and most likely for very good reasons, right? There's most likely either a regulatory requirement, so that compliance piece is big. If you're working in HIPAA or you're working with PCI or anything like that. So there's some sort of, requirement for you to meet these goals. The reality is that, you're probably going to keep that operation in-house because it's critically important to you. And the same thing with administration and architecture and engineering. these are workflows that are more likely to be insourced because you tend to buy and own the tools and try to buy and own and build your own program. And these kinds of things play directly into that. When we look at the outsourced items, most likely we see testing items, pen testing, red teaming, purple teaming. These are items where, there may be almost a requirement to outsource them because you want to have kind of a separation of your own church and state, right? You don't always necessarily want your own internal team to be testing yourself, because you wind up in this situation where, an internal pen testing team, even if they're not regularly working with the SOC, because of the nature of the fact that they're in the environment, they're more likely to pick up information by osmosis, really, that a threat actor wouldn't have. They would not have necessarily, information about how things have been architected or built. They wouldn't have heard any of that stuff that an internal team might. So we tend to see a reliance more on external sources for these, as well as these tend to be things where there may be not necessarily enough work for someone to do it all of the time, right? Maybe you're getting an annual pen test because that's what your compliance requirements say. Maybe you're getting a quarterly pen test. You might not have enough work internally to support having someone doing this every day, every week. So it makes more sense to outsource it, and therefore we see a higher number here. I do find it interesting, though, that even when we look at these items that are most likely to be outsourced, the numbers are still under 50% for those who are reporting, right? There's still a lot of organizations that are saying they are insourcing or doing some sort of hybrid model with these workflows. And if we look at who's doing both, who's using a hybrid, we tend to see a lot of stuff around kind of traditional security operations. So monitoring and detection, incident response. These are things where, we kind of traditionally think of it as like the SOC. We tend to see a lot more hybrid workflows happening. And I think that part of the reason we see this is a lot of times businesses and organizations will start to build some of these pieces internally because it makes sense to have some of that knowledge captured by the internal team. But then they don't necessarily want to have someone who is on staff 24/7, right? Maybe we only have staff for 8x5. Maybe we need to punch up the maturity of our operations really quick. So we want to partner with somebody who can help us in doing threat intelligence or vulnerability assessments and things. And the numbers kind of bear that out when we're looking at the responses here, that most likely organizations are going to have a partner where they're doing some of this internally, but they're also leaning heavily on someone to support them to get this done. So why do we insource stuff, right? Where do we pick insourced security solutions and options? A big part of it tends to be about control. You want to make sure that you know what it is, how it's built, how it works, because it's yours. You own it. At the end of the day, we are responsible for and we are the owners of whatever happens in our environments. So we have to be willing to stand up in front of the board if something goes wrong and say we did the best that we could do. And sometimes if we outsource things, we may not necessarily feel comfortable doing that. So we want to maintain that control. And when we maintain that control, we maintain that internal knowledge. We have that internally where our staff knows what is going on. They know what is good or is evil for our environment. And we're not necessarily having to kick out to somebody else to pull these things. And another big pro that we tend to see is speed. Depending on what you're outsourcing and how the workflows are going, sometimes speed matters. If we're talking about, detection or responding to an alert, speed matters. If you're dealing with somebody who's externally, they may not necessarily be able to get to it as quickly because they're juggling multiple clients. Or if you're trying to set up something like a purple teaming exercise, if you're engaging with an outside source, then the time to get going takes longer because you're having to go through contracts and go through purchasing and getting all those things up. The biggest cons, though, are costs. Realistically, staffing and tools are not necessarily cheap. And when we're building it from scratch, we aren't getting any kind of economies of scale. And then on top of that, we have to deal with the fact that we have to have these skills internally. So we may have to have someone who knows how to do pen testing, who knows how to do threat detection, who knows how to do threat intelligence, digital forensics, etc. Those are skills that are super in demand. It's a very competitive market. it may be hard to fill those skill gaps. And that may be something where we have to kind of either spend a lot more to bring those people internally, or we may be forced to outsource it. And a big con too is time, right? A lot of organizations don't necessarily want to have a 24/7 staff, but let's be real. Cybersecurity is not a 9 to 5 job per se. Nobody, I don't think I've had a holiday since I entered this field where something hasn't happened and I've had to come back in and I'm sitting like pulling apart a piece of malware on Christmas Day while everyone's opening presents, right? That's not necessarily something that every business wants to have to build and maintain, because again, that plays back to cost. Having people on staff 24/7 can get very expensive. So we kind of outsource some of these things, right? The biggest efficiencies or the biggest pros we get with outsourcing, one of them is the efficiencies, right? You're getting to buy into that economy of scale that someone is doing this for you. If somebody's doing managed detection or response for you, if they have 30 clients, well, they're spreading the cost of the tools across 30 clients. They're spreading the cost of the staff across 30 clients. You're getting to tap into these things and take advantage of them without necessarily having to foot the full bill. And that plays into scalability. Some of these solutions and some of these things we have needs for, we may not need the full capacity all of the time, or we may want to grow and expand and pick different things as we mature our programs. And having to bring people in and then lay them off is problematic. So it makes more sense to outsource those items. And it can also help us address staffing shortages. If I need someone to do pen testing, I can either train an internal staff member, or I can go out and find a company that already does this, has the staff on standby, they're trained, they're ready to go, they're credentialed, and I can just, pay them and we're done. I don't have to upskill. I don't have to wait for that time. But in order to take advantage of those pros, I am giving up control, right? I'm not necessarily going to get something that's fully customized or built to my business unit. I'm just going to get what's off the shelf. I'm giving up necessarily some of the speed on things. When we're talking about detection and response, realistically, SLAs in the contracts rule all of the outcomes. So if you're not necessarily happy with the SLAs that are out there, 15 minutes for a critical or whatever, that can become a con for you. And then ownership cost. If this is something that you're regularly having to go out and get and procure, you're likely to wind up in a situation where the cost to regularly buy that thing from someone else is more expensive than having to have built your own internal team. And we tend to see this, as Jeremiah was saying, a lot of organizations will start with a partner on something, on an outsourced, and they'll transition to insourced. And that's excellent. You love to see people mature to a point where they're able to take advantage of that stuff, because it helps, one, with gathering that internal knowledge, and then two, it can lower your ownership cost. But a lot of things that we see in responses and a lot of things that I deal with in clients is a hybrid model. We're doing some sort of blending of the two because you get to split the difference, right? This is kind of a best of both worlds approach. You get to tap the outsourced support when you need it. And your primary operations, the people who really need to know your business, live inside your business and can know it and specialize in it. And you can focus on that. And then you can go to an outside provider every now and then. Like I know, a lot of organizations, they'll have a team internally doing kind of that 9x5, 5x9 kind of support where it's Monday through Friday. They're working the primary stuff, but we want to give them a break. So nights, weekends, holidays, we'll go to an outsourced provider who can support us and take over for them and give them that time off. Or we'll bring in a consultant just to help jumpstart something, right? And then we'll take over the ownership of that internally, or we'll go to an outside provider for one piece of the puzzle. Like maybe we'll outsource penetration tests, but we'll do our vulnerability assessments internally. When we split the difference, internal teams really get to focus on what's mission critical for the business and understanding it really well. And we can kind of go out and pick and choose where we need to spread our resources a little more thinly to make sure we're getting the coverage that we need. I will say, when you're picking this stuff out, especially anytime you go to a hybrid or an outsourced model, let your internal team focus on becoming a real business partner to the rest of your organization. One of the biggest killers in cybersecurity is the fact that we're often viewed as a cost center, right? Businesses don't necessarily want to spend money on us. But if you outsource certain things so you can focus and learn your business really well, you can find critical partners internally that you can work with to help enable their workflows and make things better for them. Maybe meeting compliance objectives, maybe being able to talk about some of the stuff to your marketing team to highlight what you're doing to secure your stuff, to build confidence in the brand. You can focus on that to kind of shift some of those views internally from security being a cost center to security being a driver of the business, which is really important. But it's not necessarily something you can focus on doing if you're constantly having to run around and put out fires or try to stand up things that don't make sense for you to fully own. So picking the right model, right? What matters most to me? What matters most to my organization? When do I decide to insource something versus outsource something? When do I go hybrid? In cybersecurity, a lot of the times the answer is it depends. And in this case, the answer is most likely it depends. Realistically, this is not something where in the couple minutes we have together, we're going to be able to make sure you get to exactly what you need to do. But I want you to make sure you're taking into consideration some critical questions about your internal operations, right? What is your budget? Do you have the budget to support the staff to do that thing? Or do you need to spread it out more? What kind of skills do you have in-house? And then on top of that, not only what kind of skills do you have in-house, but what does your staff want to do? A lot of people who come into cybersecurity don't come into cybersecurity to just always be a junior SOC analyst. They want to grow into detection engineers and pen testers and firewall engineers. They want to grow and expand. So maybe there's places where you can invest in that staffing to help them grow, and you can pull some of those things that you're outsourcing back in-house over time, and you can reap some of that investment. But maybe there's things that your staff just does not want to do. Maybe everybody really hates doing security assessments, right? And that's something that you always want to outsource because you just don't want to deal with it. What does your primary business need most? Are there compliance and regulatory needs that you have to meet, right? Are you having to separate and have an external team do pen testing because of something like PCI requirements? What kind of workflows do you have in place right now? What kind of frameworks are you using? Where are you at in your security maturity journey? And where do you need to get to? And when do you need to get there by, right? Really, what can we do next to mature our security program? So here's an example, right? Here's a threat hunting workflow, that threat hunting lifecycle idea. Based on the data, there's a high likelihood you're probably doing some of this in-house right now with monitoring and detection and things like that, right? So you probably have a workflow like this that you formalized that your staff is following, where they're getting information of some kind to do a threat hunt, to kind of turn around and figure out, is there anything related to that in your environment, and develop that threat content and put it all together. But maybe you don't have full staffing to support, say, the CTI lifecycle, right? You're getting information right now. You're going out to CISA's website and you're getting the latest advisories and you're just pulling that in and turning that into threat hunts. That's good, but it may not always necessarily align with what threats matter to your organization. Sometimes you wind up chasing things that don't matter to you. So you want to make sure that you're getting kind of a better understanding of the threat lifecycle and a better understanding of the threat landscape and what threats actually apply to your business, so that your threat hunters can dial in and focus on doing threat hunting that matters to the organization and not just chasing anything that's happening, right? But you only have budget of X amount, let's say $100,000, and you need 2 staff members to do CTI lifecycle. You're not going to get 2 staff members on $100,000 to do threat intelligence for your organization, most likely, because that's not necessarily a cheap staff person to get, right? That's 2 people, $150,000 each, plus benefits, yada yada. You're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you've got less. So if that's the case, then it may make sense for us to go ahead and just outsource the intelligence lifecycle and work with a provider who does that for us, that can meet our budget and our timelines and can help us understand what threats matter to our industry, while us not having to build that ourselves because we're able to tap into what they're already making. And that allows us to mature our in-source programs of threat hunting and get better at it while actually not having to build the other piece of the puzzle. Or an example is frameworks, right? let's take a MITRE attack for, this is when I built off of AlphaV's capabilities before they decided to pull their whole exit scam and steal everybody's money. So if you wanted to test the visibility of your SIEM against AlphaV, you have a lot of things that you have to test, right? This is a very mature ransomware organization. And there's things that their malware is doing. There's things that they, as the devs, are doing. There's things that their affiliates are doing that you would need to cover. And if you look, it's a lot. There is a lot of MITRE attack coverage here from this threat actor that you would have to actually craft detections for. And a lot of these things have multiple ways to do them. So really, you have to stop and say, okay, if I want to test this, do I have someone internally that has the skills to build out detections for all of these things, that critically has the time to build out detections for all of these things? And if the answer is yes, awesome, go build it and do it internally yourself. But there's a high likelihood the answer is no. And that's where you really want to work with somebody who can help you do this kind of detection engineering or this kind of purple teaming testing, cough, cough, SCYTHE, right? Or anybody like that that can help you with these things to get jump started on that so you can test faster so that your internal team can build the detections they need while not necessarily having to build out the ways to test it. Okay, so let's say you're starting from nothing. Everybody starts somewhere. Occasionally, you wind up in a business or environment where there's just nothing is happening right now. Cybersecurity has suddenly become a new thing, and you're going to have to get it from the ground up and get going. Where do we choose to insource versus outsource? Well, the way you can help drive this and figure this out, most likely, is to get a framework. Use a framework to drive your internal business workflows. The syscritical controls are an excellent starting point. You can look at your implementation group based on how large you are, figure out what controls you need, because it can help you understand where you are now in terms of maturity. And then you can start to look at, okay, what can we insource, what can we reverse source as we build our program and put things together. You don't want to necessarily jump to pen testing and trying to insource it if it doesn't make sense. If you've got like, a budget of $100,000 a year and you're a small company in implementation group 1, and that's not necessarily what you need, right? You want to make sure that you're starting from something that makes sense to get you the most detection possible and the best coverage possible, and that you're insourcing and outsourcing when you need to help grow your maturity out, right? So if you take something like the CIS framework and use it as a roadmap, and you start at 1 and you start building your way to number 18, you can stop and go at each point and go, okay, we're to continuous vulnerability management now. We're implementation group 1. We have these number of things we have to hit. Can we do it all in-house? Do we have the tools, the capabilities, the skills? Or do we need to tap into someone who can specialize in this and do it for us to get us started on it, or do it just permanently outside? Because we're never going to get the kind of investment to bring this fully in-house, right? And you can take this as a roadmap to build your program out and pick and choose at which points you need to bring something in-house versus when it makes sense to get a partner. And when you really go out to outsource something fully, or you go out to do hybrid model and you're kind of playing with somebody, really take the time to pick a partner that makes sense for your organization, that aligns with your values, that aligns with your needs and understands your industry. Don't just grab the first partner off a Google ad. That may not necessarily get you the best results. And really be mindful that a lot of times in this industry, you get what you pay for. I've helped many organizations that have started with something and they've had a partner doing it, and they picked the partner that was the lowest cost, and then they're still having to do breach cleanup, right? That happens. You get what you pay for. Sometimes you have to splurge a little bit to truly get what you need covered. Anyway, that's what I really wanted to cover. I've got a couple minutes now. We can kick it over to questions.
Thanks, Nick. That was great. I do know that we've got a couple good questions here. Samir asked, do you see AI impacting the balance of insourcing versus outsourcing in the near or long term?
Yeah, so this is one of those things where AI is coming. You heard Jake talk about a lot of really good stuff with AI and what's happening. And the reality is that it's going to impact us in the near term because we're able to start doing some things potentially internally that make more sense to outsource to an AI, right? You're still outsourcing it. You're just outsourcing it to somebody who isn't a real human. You're outsourcing it to someone who can help you do something faster. So let's take threat intelligence for an example, right? Maybe you need to build a threat intelligence report around a certain threat actor that regularly impacts your industry. And traditionally, you would outsource all of that. Maybe you can start to bring some of that back in-house by relying on a generative AI solution to help craft some of the report for you, right? You can feed it all of the different information you have about it, pull that together and get to a report faster. And that cuts down on your need for necessarily outsourcing it. Or AI itself. Maybe you're just starting to grapple with using AI tool sets in your environment, and it may make sense to outsource some of that jumpstart to, make sure you're getting solutions that make sense, that match your business, and that are secure. If you don't have somebody who knows how to deploy an LLM and you're concerned about using something like ChatGPT because it could leak your data, you may need to find a partner who can help you stand up an internal LLM and get going and help you get trained on it.
Awesome. There was another question from Christina. She asked what your opinion was of external partners that outsource parts of their services.
This is one of those things where, it depends, as the classic thing goes in cybersecurity. I personally am not a big fan of it. I like to know that the people that I'm working with are the people that I'm working with. When I've built the, SOC for the Florida Department of State, when we had to go to a partner, one of my questions was, do you have any third parties that you outsource to? Are they in other countries? What are you doing? Because I needed to make sure that I knew the people and that the things that they were doing for me were being handled in a safe and secure manner that met my compliance requirements. Doing this with our clients now and partnering with them on stuff, we try to keep as much in-house for us and not necessarily always outsource. Does that mean that I don't outsource some things? Yes, but I make it explicitly clear to a client when I'm working with them and I say, okay, we're going to do this service for you now and we're going to help you with it because you need it. But I don't necessarily have someone internally who has that specialty. So we're outsourcing it to this company and we facilitate the relationship and we build it and we grow it. It's somebody that we've vetted, we've worked with really well. We spend a lot of time on it. It's not necessarily somebody where they've just picked someone, and they're going fly by wire. You as an organization really need to somewhat interrogate your providers on this kind of stuff when it comes down to what are you outsourcing on my behalf, versus insourcing. So you don't wind up in a situation where you've picked a provider and they're subbing it to a third party in a foreign country that violates your compliance requirement and you didn't even know it was happening until a breach happened, something else is going on. So for me personally, I like to try to keep things in that nice little safe bubble as much as possible. But that is entirely based on your organization's risk appetite and what you're willing to work with.
Yeah, great. Another one for you here, Nick, from Haya. She is new to security. And I think the interesting thing with this question is balancing getting exposure to new disciplines within cybersecurity while still trying to, learn the fundamentals of certain tools and techniques. What's a good way to balance this?
So this is a lot. So I teach boot camps on the side, and I've worked with a bunch of students on different things. And one of the things that I tell them is, start from the basics. If you don't have a fundamental understanding of computers and networks per se, then you may not necessarily be able to understand why something matters or how you're defending it. You may wind up in a situation where if you've never seen or worked with Active Directory, how do you know what matters when Mimikatz comes in and dumps the credentials out of it, right? Or why that's bad. Start from the real basics. Build yourself a home lab. You can do it super cheap these days. Even something as simple as just getting VirtualBox and a couple of Linux and Windows ISOs to stand up your own little internal network does wonders and pays dividends in you understanding the fundamental pieces that all of the rest of the cybersecurity knowledge is going to be built on, whether you want to go into pen testing, whether you want to go into network security, whether you want to go into data governance, right? get those foundational basics of just IT kind of things together, and start to build on them and understand them, because it'll help you grow and understand there. And then kind of work through a little bit of everything. If you haven't picked a specialization, you don't know where you want to go yet, that's perfectly fine. You mentioned Hack the Box and things like that. Those are great platforms to start with. You can get exposed to a little bit of everything, and that's perfect, because if you don't know what you want to do, being able to spend times touching different things really helps you understand, okay, I really liked working with firewalls, and I really hated doing Python scripting, right? So maybe I want to do this versus that, right? Take the time to actually touch the different things and build them. If you build your own internal stuff, it's okay. You're not going to break anything permanently. You can mess with things. It's perfectly fine. But take the time to build those things out, touch as much as you can, and get a little bit of experience just playing around with it, so you get a better idea of what you really like compared to just what's trendy.
Yep.
And don't be afraid to pivot. It's one of those things where if you don't like it, you're doing it just because you feel you need to. It's not going to be fun. It's not going to be enjoyable. And it's probably not a field you're going to work in for long. So find whatever makes you excited, whatever makes you happy, and take that path. Worst comes to worst, you decide it's not for you, and you can change it up. This field is so large that you could pick a different niche every day of the week and learn something new.
Spot on. Well, good. Thank you very much, Nicholas. It's great to have you join, and appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you very much.